A mother bobcat begs for help for her cubs. The reason why will melt your heart on a stormy night. An ordinary woman opens her door to find something no one could believe. A wild bobcat. Not attacking, but pleading. And when she follows the cries into the woods, she stumbles upon a secret more dangerous than she ever imagined. What begins as an act of compassion quickly spirals into a battle against a ruthless force, determined to keep its crimes hidden. Her courage to save the helpless cubs puts her life on the line and uncovers a truth that changes everything. But in a world where power protects the guilty and the innocent are left to suffer, how far will one woman go to protect what cannot protect itself? And when predator and protector collide, who will survive? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. Thunder cracked across the darkening North Carolina sky as Clara Jennings pulled her worn quilted jacket tighter around her shoulders. Through the cabin's kitchen window, she watched the tall pines of the Blue Ridge foothills bend and sway in the strengthening wind. The wooden wind chimes her mother had given her years ago clattered wildly on the front porch, their familiar melody now an urgent warning of the approaching storm. Clara lived alone in this remote cabin, just the way she preferred it after years of volunteer work with the local wildlife sanctuary. She had grown accustomed to, and even fond of, the solitude. The cabin's rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings reflected her practical nature, with only a few family photos and well-worn books offering hints of sentiment. Looks like it's going to be a rough night, she muttered to herself, moving to secure the shutters. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the first heavy drops of rain. Clara had weathered many storms in these mountains, but something about this one felt different. The air crackled with an unusual tension that set her nerves on edge. As darkness fell, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the windows while thunder boomed overhead, echoing through the valley. Clara sat in her favorite armchair near the wood stove, trying to focus on her worn copy of a wildlife guide, but her attention kept drifting to the sounds of the tempest outside. Just before midnight, an unexpected sound cut through the storm's chaos. Sharp, desperate scratching at her front door. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. Living alone in the woods, she had learned to be cautious of unexpected visitors, especially at night. The scratching continued, more urgent now, accompanied by a low, guttural sound she couldn't quite identify. Moving quietly, Clara reached for the baseball bat she kept near the door, a concession to her brother's insistence on self-defense before their estrangement. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the door, the scratching growing more frantic with each passing second. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. The only response was more scratching and what sounded almost like a whimper. Taking a deep breath, Clara gripped the bat tightly in one hand and slowly opened the door, ready to defend herself if necessary. What she saw made her gasp and step back in surprise. There, on her porch, stood a mother bobcat, her golden eyes reflecting the porch light matted from the rain. Clara's first instinct was to slam the door shut, but something stopped her. The bobcat wasn't displaying typical aggressive behavior. Instead, it paced anxiously, looking at Clara with what she could only describe as desperation. Years of working with wildlife had taught Clara to read animal behavior, and this was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. The bobcat made that sound again, a mix between a cry and a plea, then took a few steps away from the door, looking back at Clara expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Clara whispered in disbelief. The bobcat repeated the gesture, moving a few more steps into the rain before turning back again. Clara's practical side screamed that this was madness. Following a wild animal into the woods during a storm was exactly the kind of thing she warned others never to do. But her instincts, honed by years of working with injured wildlife, told her something was terribly wrong. Quickly, she grabbed her raincoat and flashlight. The bobcat waited patiently as Clara stepped out into the storm, then began leading her into the darkness. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but thunder still rumbled overhead as they made their way through the underbrush. The beam of Clara's flashlight bounced off wet leaves and branches. As she followed the bobcat deeper into the woods, the animal moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure Clara was still following. After about 10 minutes of careful navigation through the wet forest, Clara began to hear it, faint cries carrying through the rain. The bobcat led her to a small clearing, and Clara's heart sank as her flashlight beam revealed the source of the cries. The bobcat cubs, no more than a few weeks old, were trapped in cruel steel snares. The sight made Clara's blood run cold. These types of traps were illegal in this area, and for good reason. The cubs were struggling weakly, their tiny legs caught in the metal loops. The mother bobcat approached them, making soft sounds of distress as she nuzzled her trapped babies. She then turned to Clara and in the beam of the flashlight, their eyes met. In that moment, Clara understood with perfect clarity why this wild creature had sought her help. "Oh, you poor things," Clara breathed, moving closer to examine the snares. The cubs mewed pitifully, too exhausted from their struggle to show fear of her presence. Their mother watched intently, but made no move to stop Clara as she knelt down to assess the situation. The rain had turned to a light mist now, and Clara's hands shook as she examined the first snare. These were professional-grade traps, the kind used by illegal fur trappers. Someone had deliberately set them here, knowing full well the suffering they would cause. The thought made anger rise in her chest, temporarily displacing her fear. Clara's hands trembled as she examined the cruel metal snares more closely. She had dealt with injured wildlife before, but never anything like this. The cubs' frightened mews tore at her heart, while their mother paced anxiously nearby, her golden eyes never leaving her trapped babies. "It's okay, little ones," Clara whispered, trying to keep her voice steady and calm. "I'm going to help you." She reached into her coat pocket for the multi-tool she always carried, a habit from her wildlife volunteer work that was about to prove invaluable. The first snare was crude but effective, its steel cable cutting into the cub's front leg. Clara's fingers moved carefully, working to find the release mechanism. The metal was slick with rain, making it difficult to grip. After several tense minutes, she finally managed to trigger the release. The snare sprang open with a harsh metallic snap that made both cubs flinch. "There we go," Clara murmured soothingly, gently lifting the first cub free. Its leg was abraded, but not seriously injured. The cub had been lucky. The mother bobcat moved closer, making soft chirping sounds to comfort her baby. Clara carefully set the free cub down, and it immediately scrambled to its mother's side. The second snare proved more challenging. It was wrapped tighter, and the cub had struggled so much that the cable had twisted. Clara's fingers were growing numb from the cold rain, and frustration built in her chest as she struggled with the mechanism. "Come on," she muttered, blinking away raindrops that fell from her hood as she worked. Clara noticed details about the snares that made her stomach turn. These weren't amateur traps, they were professional grade, the kind used by experienced trappers. The cable was high quality, and despite the crude setting, the mechanism was well maintained. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Finally, the second snare released its grip. Clara lifted the cub free, checking it for injuries before setting it down beside its sibling. The mother bobcat immediately gathered both cubs close, checking them over with gentle nudges of her nose. Clara sat back on her heels, relief washing over her. But as she examined one of the snares more closely in her flashlight beam, her relief curdled into dread. There, stamped into the metal base of the trap, was a distinctive mark she had seen before. A small bee enclosed in a circle. "No," she whispered, her breath catching. "Briggs. Harlan Briggs was infamous in these parts, though few dared speak against him openly. A wealthy landowner with connections throughout the county, he maintained a facade of respectability while running what many suspected was an extensive poaching operation. Clara had heard rumors about his illegal trapping activities, but this was the first direct evidence she'd ever encountered. Standing up, Clara collected both snares, wrapping them carefully in her coat. She couldn't leave them here. They were evidence of Briggs's illegal activities, but possessing them also meant she was now a direct threat to his operation. The thought made her shiver, and not from the cold. Not from the cold. "Come on," she said to the mother bobcat, who was still tending to her cubs. "It's not safe here." To her amazement, the bobcat seemed to understand. She gathered one cub in her mouth while Clara, moving slowly and cautiously, picked up the other. Together, they made their way back through the rainy darkness toward Clara's cabin. The trek back was tense. Every snapping twig made Clara jump, suddenly aware that she might not be the only human in these woods tonight. Briggs was known to check his trap lines personally, especially during storms when most people stayed indoors. The thought of running into him here, alone in the dark, made her pulse race. They reached the clearing near Clara's cabin without incident. The mother bobcat took her cub from Clara's arms with gentle care, then hesitated, looking at Clara with those intelligent golden eyes. For a moment, they regarded each other, human and wild creature, connected by an unlikely alliance of necessity and compassion. Then the bobcat turned away, guiding her cubs into the underbrush. Clara watched until they disappeared into the darkness, the weight of the snares in her coat serving as a heavy reminder of what she had just stumbled into. She had crossed a line tonight, interfering with Harlan Briggs's illegal operations. The question now was, what would it cost her? Inside her cabin, Clara laid the snares on her kitchen table, the metal still gleaming wetly in the lamplight. The bee markings seemed to mock her, a brand of cruelty that represented everything she had dedicated her life to fighting against. Briggs's reputation for ruthlessness was well-earned, and she had just made herself his enemy. Clara's hands shook as she dried off the snares and wrapped them in an old towel. She would need to document everything, the location where she found them, the technical details of the traps, the injuries they had caused. But that could wait until morning. For now, she hid the bundle in the back of her closet, behind boxes of old wildlife rehabilitation supplies. The storm continued to rage outside, but Clara barely noticed it now. Her mind was racing with the implications of what had happened. She had saved two innocent creatures tonight, but in doing so, she had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Harlan Briggs's shadow now loomed over her small corner of the world, and she knew with crushing certainty that her quiet life would never be the same. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and purples as Clara surveyed her property, searching for a safe place to hide the injured cubs. Her gaze settled on an old storage shed behind her cabin. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Inside the musty space, Clara cleared away dusty garden tools and empty feed bags, creating a corner sanctuary. She laid down old blankets and towels, forming a soft nest. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, exhaustion from the night's events weighing heavily on her shoulders. "This will have to work for now," she muttered, arranging the space to mimic a natural den. The mother, Bobcat, watched from the doorway, cubs huddled close to her legs. Clara had never seen a wild animal display such trust in a human before. It both moved and worried her. With gentle movements, she examined each cub more thoroughly in the morning light. The steel snares had left angry red marks around their legs, but thankfully, no bones appeared broken. Still, the wounds needed cleaning. To prevent infection, Clara retrieved her limited first aid supplies from the cabin: antiseptic, gauze, and antibiotic ointment she usually reserved for injured songbirds. "I know this might sting a little," she whispered, carefully cleaning the first cub's wounds. The tiny creature squirmed but didn't fight her ministrations. After treating both cubs, Clara faced another challenge: feeding them. Her cabin's pantry wasn't stocked for carnivores. She found some canned tuna and chicken, emptying the contents into shallow bowls. The mother Bobcat sniffed the offerings cautiously before allowing her cubs to eat. As she watched them feed, Clara wrestled with her conscience. She should report Harlan's illegal trapping to the authorities, but who would believe her word against his? Harlan Briggs practically owned the county. His donations funded half the sheriff's department, and his family name adorned several local buildings. The sound of tires crunching on gravel snapped Clara from her thoughts. Her heart jumped into her throat as a massive black pickup truck pulled into her driveway. Even without seeing the driver, she knew who it was. Only Harlan Briggs drove a truck that expensive in these parts. Clara quickly shut the shed door, praying the Bobcat family would stay quiet. She walked toward her cabin, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Harlan was already climbing out of his truck, his tall frame unfolding like a shadow in the morning light. "Miss Jennings," he called out, his voice carrying a false warmth that made her skin crawl. "Lovely morning for a visit, isn't it?" He wore expensive hunting clothes and leather boots that probably cost more than Clara made in a month. "Mr. Briggs," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. "What brings you out this way?" Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached. "Oh, just checking on my property lines. Had some trouble with trespassers lately." He paused, studying her face. "Strange thing happened last night. Some of my equipment went missing during the storm." Clara felt cold despite the warming morning air. "That's unfortunate," she said carefully. "Isn't it, though?" Harlan took another step closer. "You know, Miss Jennings, these mountains have their own way of doing things, their own rules. Sometimes city folks like yourself don't quite understand that. I've lived here for 3 years, Mr. Briggs. I understand plenty." His smile vanished. "Do you? Because interfering with a man's livelihood out here, well, that's just not something wise folks do." He glanced around her property, his gaze lingering on the shed, especially not over some worthless varmints. Clara's fear began to transform into anger. "Is that a threat, Mr. Briggs?" "A threat?" He chuckled, but the sound held no humor. "No, Miss Jennings, just some friendly advice from a concerned neighbor. Whatever you think you found last night, whatever you think you're protecting, it's not worth the trouble it'll bring you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara said firmly, though her heart pounded against her ribs. Harlan's eyes hardened. "Don't play dumb, girl. It doesn't suit you. Those traps were on my land, and anything caught in them belongs to me. Now, where are they?" Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "If you had legal traps on your property, Mr. Briggs, you wouldn't be here asking me about them. You'd be talking to the sheriff." The threat in his expression became unmistakable. You're making a mistake, Miss Jennings. A big one. Things have a way of happening out here in the woods. Accidents, fires, people disappear sometimes, never to be found. Are you done? Clara's voice shook slightly, but she stood her ground. Because if you are, I'd like you to leave my property. Now. Harlan studied her for a long moment, his jaw clenching. Finally, he turned back toward his truck. Remember what I said about accidents, Miss Jennings? It would be a shame if anything happened to this pretty little cabin of yours. Clara watched as he drove away, her legs trembling so badly she had to sit down on her porch steps. The encounter had confirmed her worst fears. Harlan Briggs was exactly as dangerous as people said. And now she had made herself his target. From inside the shed came the soft mewing of the cubs, reminding her exactly why she had taken this risk. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had chosen her path the moment she followed that mother Bobcat into the storm. There was no turning back now. Clara's hands shook as she dialed the number she hadn't called in 3 years. After Harlan's visit, the reality of her situation had hit hard. She was alone against a powerful man who had no qualms about making threats. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah. Clara's throat tightened. David? It's Clara. The silence that followed felt endless. She could hear him breathing, probably debating whether to hang up. What do you want? His voice was rough, guarded. I need your help, Clara said softly. Please. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. Another long pause. Where are you? Same place. The cabin off Miller's Creek Road. You're still out there? He sounded surprised. Thought you'd have given up playing Forest Guardian by now. Clara pushed down the hurt his words caused. Can you come? Please, David. I'm in trouble. Something in her tone must have gotten through to him. Give me an hour, he said. Then hung up. Clara spent that hour pacing, checking on the cubs, and fighting the urge to call him back. When she heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle, she rushed outside. David's old blue Jeep looked exactly as she remembered it, though maybe a bit more weathered, like its owner. David stepped out, and Clara's heart clenched. Her brother looked older than his 38 years, his face lined with bitterness. His ranger's physique had hardened into something more severe, and his eyes held none of the warmth she remembered from their childhood. You look thin, he said by way of greeting. You look tired, she countered. They stood awkwardly for a moment before David gestured at the cabin. This place still leaking? Only when it rains. Clara attempted a smile, which is only about 3 times a week. He didn't smile back. What kind of trouble are you in? Clara took a deep breath. It's complicated. Maybe you should see for yourself. She led him toward the shed, explaining as they walked. Last night, during the storm, I found some illegal traps. Steel snares, David. And what was caught in them? She opened the shed door. The mother Bobcat, still wary of strangers, backed into a corner, positioning herself between David and her cubs. The cubs themselves were sleeping, their bandaged legs a stark reminder of their ordeal. David's expression shifted from skepticism to something darker. Steel snares, he repeated. Harlan Briggs. You remember his work. Kind of hard to forget. The thing that cost me my career. David knelt, examining the cubs from a safe distance. His ranger training showed in how he assessed their injuries. These are clean bandages. You did this. Clara nodded. I had to try. But Harlan was here this morning. He threatened me, David. Made it clear he wants them back. Of course he did. David stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. Damn it, Clara. Why didn't you just leave them alone? You know what he's capable of. I couldn't. The force of her response surprised them both. I couldn't just walk away. You wouldn't have, either. Not the David I used to know. That David's gone, he said flatly. Harlan Briggs made sure of that. Clara stepped closer to her brother. Is he? Because the David I knew fought against exactly this kind of thing. He stood up for what was right, even when it cost him everything. And look where that got me. David's voice was bitter. Lost my job, my reputation. Had to watch while Harlan's lawyers turned me into some crazy vigilante who was harassing an upstanding citizen. Nobody would hire me after that. I had to leave town. I know, Clara said softly. I should have stood by you then. I'm sorry I didn't, but I'm standing here now, asking for your help. These cubs will die without protection, and I can't face Harlan alone. David stared at the Bobcat family for a long moment. The mother had relaxed slightly, seeming to sense he wasn't a threat. One of the cubs had woken and was attempting to wobble toward its sibling on 3 good legs. You always did have more heart than sense, he muttered. But there was a slight softening in his tone. Runs in the family. Clara risked a small smile. David sighed heavily. What's your plan? Because if you think we can just call the authorities, no. Clara interrupted. I know better than that, but you still have contacts from your ranger days, right? People who might help if they knew what was happening. Maybe. David watched as the mother bobcat gently nudged her cub back toward its nest. Some of them never believed Harlan's lies about me, but they'd be risking their jobs, like you did. David shot her a sharp look, but Clara held his gaze. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'll make some calls. But Clara, his expression grew serious. You need to understand what you're getting into. Harlan won't stop at threats. When I exposed his illegal hunting operation, he didn't just take my job, he made sure I couldn't even stay in the state. Are you ready for that kind of fight? Clara looked at the Bobcat family, then back at her brother. I'm ready if you're with me. Something flickered in David's eyes, a spark of the protective older brother he used to be. Well, he said gruffly, I guess someone needs to keep you from getting yourself killed. He paused, then added more quietly, I should have been doing that all along. Clara felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. Does this mean you'll help? Yeah, little sister. David's voice was rough with emotion. I'll help. God knows I've spent enough time hiding from Harlan Briggs. Maybe it's time to face him again. He reached out awkwardly and squeezed her shoulder, the first physical contact they'd had in years. But first, you're going to tell me everything. And then, we're going to make a plan that doesn't end with either of us in jail or worse. Clara nodded, relief washing over her. For the first time since finding the cubs, she felt hope her brother was back, changed, hardened, but still the protector she remembered. Together, they might actually have a chance against Harlan Briggs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees as Clara and David worked together at her kitchen table, which had become an impromptu veterinary station. Medical supplies, bandages, and antibiotic ointments were spread across the worn wooden surface while they tended to the injured cubs. Hold him steady now, David instructed, his hands moving with surprising gentleness as he cleaned one of the cub's wounds. These cuts are deeper than I first thought. Clara cradled the small creature, murmuring soft reassurances. I know, little one. We're trying to help. The cub squirmed weakly, but seemed to sense their good intentions. You've done a decent job. With the initial treatment, David observed, applying fresh bandages. But these injuries. He shook his head. Those weren't just random traps, Clara. They were designed to cause maximum damage without killing immediately. Harlan wants his prizes alive when he collects them. For what purpose? Clara asked. Though she dreaded the answer, David's jaw tightened. Private collectors. Rich folks who want exotic pets or trophies. When I was investigating him before, I found evidence he was shipping animals all over the country. But I could never prove it conclusively. They worked in silence for a few minutes, their hands moving in careful coordination. The mother bobcat watched from her corner of the kitchen, alert but allowing them to help her young. Clara marveled at the animal's trust. We need to document everything, David said finally, reaching for his phone. Every injury, every trap, location, and we need to do it properly this time. He began taking detailed photographs of the cub's wounds, making sure to capture clear angles of the damage. I can show you where I found them, Clara offered. The snares are still out there. David nodded grimly. That's our next step. But first, let's finish here. They spent the next hour changing bandages and administering antibiotics. Clara watched her brother work, noting how his ranger training emerged in his methodical approach. Despite his earlier reluctance, he was fully engaged now, his expertise evident in every careful movement. As they finished with the second cub, David spoke quietly. You know, I've been thinking about those years after everything. I should have reached out to you. Clara paused in her work. I should have believed you about Harlan. Everyone said you were just bitter, making accusations without proof. I let them convince me. You weren't the only one, David replied, but his tone held no bitterness now. Harlan's got half the county in his pocket. The other half is too scared to speak up. Once the cubs were settled, they gathered their equipment for investigating the trap sites. David insisted on bringing his camera with GPS capabilities and a detailed notepad. Everything has to be documented perfectly, he explained. Harlan's lawyers will jump on any mistake. The woods were quiet as they hiked to the location where Clara had found the cubs. David moved with the confidence of someone who knew these forests intimately, though he'd been gone for years. Here, Clara pointed to the clearing. This is where I found them. David surveyed the area with professional attention. These are professional-grade snares, he noted, examining the mechanisms carefully. Modified to be extra cruel. Look at these serrated edges. He photographed each trap from multiple angles, noting their GPS coordinates and specific details. About their construction, see these markings. He pointed to tiny notches on the metal. These are Harlan's signature. He marks his equipment so his men know which traps belong to their operation. How many traps do you think are out here? Claire asked, scanning the surrounding forest. Dozens. Probably hundreds, David replied grimly. When I was investigating before, we found evidence of at least 3 major trapping zones. But this, he gestured to the surrounding area. This suggests his operation has grown significantly. They spent the next 2 hours methodically searching the surrounding area, finding and documenting 5 more traps. Each discovery strengthened their resolve and added to their growing collection of evidence. We need to be smart about this, David said as they headed back toward the cabin. Harlan's influence runs deeper than you know. The local police won't help. He's got connections. There, the game wardens are understaffed and overwhelmed. And some of them, he trailed off meaningfully, are on his payroll. Clara finished. Exactly. But I still know people we can trust. Former colleagues who never bought into Harlan's lies. We just have to be careful about who we approach. Back at the cabin, they reviewed their documentation. David had taken over 60 photographs and filled several pages with detailed notes about trap, locations, designs, and the cubs' injuries. Clara felt a surge of hope seeing their evidence, laid out so professionally. This is just the beginning, David warned, seeing her expression. Gathering evidence is one thing. Using it effectively is another. Harlan's fought off investigations before, but not like this, Clara insisted. Not with both of us working together, and not with living proof of his cruelty. She gestured to the recovering cubs. David's expression softened as he watched the small family. The mother bobcat had settled her cubs into their makeshift nest, both little ones sleeping peacefully under her watchful eye. You're right, he admitted. This time is different. We've got something concrete to fight for. He turned to his sister with renewed determination. First thing tomorrow, we'll start reaching out to my old contacts. Carefully. And we'll need to set up surveillance around your property. Harlan won't take our interference lightly. Clara nodded, feeling the weight of their undertaking, but also a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Working alongside her brother again. Seeing his expertise and dedication, she knew they'd made the right choice. Whatever happens, she said quietly, I'm glad you're here, David. He squeezed her shoulder in response, the gesture carrying years of unspoken reconciliation. Together, they began organizing their evidence, preparing for the fight ahead. The Bobcat family rested nearby, unknowing symbols of their renewed purpose and shared determination to stop Harlan Briggs's cruel operations once and for all. The morning mist clung to the Blue Ridge foothills as Clara made her way down the familiar path to check on her wildlife feeders. She stopped abruptly, her heart skipping a beat. Something wasn't right. The undergrowth had been disturbed, branches broken in a way that spoke of human interference rather than animal activity. She crouched down, carefully pushing aside a cluster of ferns. Her blood ran cold. A new steel snare lay hidden beneath, its cruel teeth ready to snap shut on any unsuspecting creature. This was different from the others. It was placed specifically to catch animals coming to her. Feeders, David, she called out, her voice shaking. You need to see this. Her brother emerged from the cabin, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. He's getting bold, David muttered, carefully documenting the trap with his camera. This is barely 50 yards from your door. They spent the next hour sweeping the area, finding 3 more snares strategically placed around Clara's property. Each one was positioned to target the wildlife she'd been protecting. It wasn't just poaching anymore. It was personal. Later that morning, Clara drove into town for supplies. The usually friendly atmosphere of Miller's general store felt different. Conversations stopped when she entered, and familiar faces turned away. Mrs. Miller, who had always greeted her warmly, barely met her eyes while ringing up her purchases. Everything all right? Mrs. Miller, Clara asked, concerned. The older woman glanced around nervously before leaning forward. I shouldn't say anything, but people are talking, Clara, saying you've been causing trouble, trespassing on private property, interfering with legal hunting operations. Clara's stomach churned. That's not true. You know me, Mrs. Miller. I've never. I know, dear. Mrs. Miller interrupted softly. But Harlan Briggs has a lot of friends in this county. Be careful. The warning followed Clara home like a shadow. She found David in the kitchen, poring over maps of the area. His ranger training was evident in the precise way he marked locations and made notes. We've got trouble, he said without looking up. Just got word from my old contact at the sheriff's office. Harlan filed a formal complaint against you for trespassing. Claims he has security camera footage of you on his property. Clara sank into a chair. That's impossible. I've never. Doesn't matter if it's true. David cut in. Sheriff Matthews has always been in Harlan's pocket. They're building a case against you, trying to make it look like you're the one breaking laws. A knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, they could see Deputy Warren's patrol car parked outside. David motioned for Clara to stay quiet while he answered. The deputy's typically friendly demeanor was replaced with official stiffness. Got some complaints about interference with legal hunting activities, he stated, not quite meeting David's eyes. Need to ask Miss Jennings some questions. You have a warrant, David asked coolly. Don't make this difficult, David. Just trying to do my job. Your job? David's voice took on an edge. Like when you lost the evidence files from my investigation 3 years ago. The deputy's face reddened. That was never proven. Save it, David interrupted. We both know who you really work for. No warrant, no questions. Have a nice day. Deputy. After the patrol car disappeared down the drive, Clara turned to her brother. He was involved with what happened to your investigation. David's expression was grim. Warren. Matthews. At least to game wardens, and who knows how many others. Harlan's built himself quite a network over the years. Bribes some, blackmails others. When I got too close to exposing it, they made sure I lost everything. Clara watched as her brother pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. We need help, he said. Real help. People who can't be bought. He paused on a number. Remember Mark Chen? My old partner from the Federal Wildlife Service. The one who moved to Washington. David nodded. He's been building cases against trafficking networks. If we can document enough evidence, prove the connection between Harlan's operation and interstate shipping, it would bypass local law enforcement entirely. Clara finished, understanding dawning. Exactly. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and Harlan's friends in the department will find a reason to arrest you. Or worse. They spent the rest of the afternoon strengthening their documentation. David showed Clara how to properly photograph evidence, mark GPS coordinates, and maintain a detailed chain of custody for everything they collected. The mother Bobcat and her cubs, now recovering in the shed behind Clara's cabin, were living proof of Harlan's crimes. As evening approached, David's phone buzzed with a text. His face grew serious as he read it. Just heard from another contact. Harlan scheduled a meeting with the county commissioners tomorrow, trying to push through some new ordinance about wildlife management on private land. He's trying to make his hunting operation look legitimate, Clara realized, and make it harder for anyone to challenge him. David added, this goes deeper than we thought. Clara, he's not just some backwoods poacher anymore. He's built himself a whole system of protection. The realization settled over them like a heavy cloud. They weren't just fighting one man's cruelty. They were up against an entire network of corruption that had taken root in their community. But as Clara looked at the recovering Bobcat family, watched the cubs growing stronger each day, she knew they couldn't back down. David seemed to read her thoughts. We'll need to be smart about this, he said. Careful, document everything. Build our case piece by piece. And most importantly, he met his sister's eyes. We watch each other's backs, because Harlan and his friends, they're going to try everything they can to stop us. Clara nodded, her determination growing stronger despite the fear. The peaceful life she'd built here might be shattered, but something more important had taken its place, a chance to fight for what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. David's truck bounced along the overgrown logging road, branches scraping against the sides as they ventured deeper into Harlan's property. Clara gripped the dashboard, her heart pounding with every crunch of gravel beneath their tires. Are you sure about this? She whispered, though they were miles from anyone who might hear. Mark's contact said Harlan keeps his records in the old hunting cabin, David replied, keeping his voice low. If we're going to prove what he's doing, this is our chance. The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy, creating shifting shadows that made Clara jump at every movement. They had waited until Harlan left for his meeting with the county commissioners, but the risk still felt overwhelming. The cabin appeared ahead, weathered and uninviting. David parked behind a thick stand of pines, concealing the truck from the main trail. Remember, he said, we're just here to document. No taking anything. No disturbing the scene. Photos only. Clara nodded, clutching her camera. The cabin's door was secured with a heavy padlock, but David had come prepared. Years of wildlife service experience hadn't gone to waste. Within minutes, they were inside. The cabin's interior was surprisingly organized. Mounted heads lined the walls, not just local species, but exotic animals that had no business in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Clara's stomach turned as she photographed each one, noting the dates and locations marked on small brass plaques. Clara. David called from a back room. Found something. She followed his voice to what appeared to be an office. David stood before an open safe, his face grim as he held up a leather-bound ledger. bound ledger. Look at this. The pages were filled with meticulous records, dates, species, prices, buyer information. Some entries were marked with red stars, others with different colored dots. Claire photographed each page while David explained the coding system. The stars are interstate shipments, he said. These dots, different buyers. This isn't just local hunting trophies. He's running a full trafficking operation. Endangered species, exotic pets, traditional medicine markets. A creaking floorboard made them both freeze. Footsteps approached from the front porch. Back door. David mouthed, quickly replacing the ledger. They slipped out just as voices carried. From inside. Through the window, Clara glimpsed two men she didn't recognize. Dressed in expensive hunting gear. They crept back to the truck, moving carefully through the underbrush. Only when they were miles away did Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. We need to show this to someone who can help, she said, reviewing the photos on her camera. Someone who knows what they're looking at. David nodded. I know just the person. The retired wildlife officer's home sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by native plants and bird feeders. Officer Chen, Mark's former mentor, opened the door before they could knock, as if he'd been expecting them. About time you just showed up, he said, ushering them inside. His silver hair caught the late afternoon light, and despite his age, his movements were still precise and purposeful. Mark told me you were gathering evidence on Harlan. Let's see what you found. They spread the photos across his kitchen table while David explained everything they discovered. The older man examined each image carefully, making notes and occasionally asking questions about specific details. The shipping codes, he said, pointing to a series of numbers in the ledger. They match patterns we use to track in major trafficking cases. And these buyers, he tapped several names. Known players in the black market trade. This isn't small-time poaching anymore. Can you help us build a case? Claire asked. The retired officer leaned back, studying them both. What you've uncovered. Here, it's bigger than local jurisdiction. Harlan's operation is part of a network we've been trying to crack for years. The right evidence, properly documented, could bring down not just him, but dozens of connected operations. He pulled out a folder, spreading out additional photos and documents. I've been keeping my own records since I left the service. Suspected. Shipment routes, shell companies, corrupt officials. With what you found, we might finally have enough to move. But we have to be careful, David warned. Harlan has people everywhere. That's why we do this by the book. The older man replied, everything documented, everything backed up. Multiple copies in secure locations. We build it so tight they can't wriggle out with technicalities or lost evidence. They work through the evening, organizing their findings and creating a secure documentation system. The retired officer showed them how to properly catalog evidence, establish clear chains of custody, and protect their digital files from tampering. The hard part isn't getting the evidence, he explained, showing Clara how to properly timestamp and geotag her photos. It's making sure it stands up in court. These people have expensive lawyers and friends in high places. Everything has to be perfect. As night fell, they had assembled a comprehensive file linking Harlan's local hunting operation to a much larger trafficking network. The ledger entries, combined with shipping records and buyer histories, painted a picture of an organized criminal enterprise operating under the guise of legal hunting. This isn't just about those cubs anymore, Clara realized, looking at the evidence spread before them. This is about stopping something much worse. The retired officer nodded. Sometimes it takes a small act of compassion, saving the cubs, to uncover a much bigger fight. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Clara looked at David, saw the same determination in his eyes that she felt. They had moved beyond simple wildlife rescue into a battle against organized crime and corruption. The stakes were higher, the dangers greater. But the cause was even more important than when they started. The evidence was clear. Harlan Briggs wasn't just a local threat. He was a key player in an international wildlife trafficking network, using his local influence and connections to shield a much larger criminal enterprise. With the retired officer's help and their growing body of evidence, Clara and David had the tools to bring it all down, if they could stay alive long enough to use them. The morning air felt electric with possibility as Clara and David set up their final surveillance points. After weeks of careful planning with Officer Chen's guidance, their net was nearly complete. Hidden cameras dotted strategic locations around Harlan's property, each one carefully concealed in natural cover and positioned to capture key areas of his operation. Remember to angle this one toward the loading dock, David instructed, helping Claire secure a weatherproof camera in a hollow tree. That's where most of the nighttime activity happens. Clara nodded, double-checking the camera's field of view. On her tablet, The screen showed a perfect view of the area where they'd previously spotted unmarked trucks, arriving in the early morning hours. Got it. This makes camera number 12. They'd been methodical in their approach. Following Officer Chen's strict protocols for evidence gathering, each camera was GPS tagged, its location documented with precise coordinates. Every piece of evidence was immediately backed up to secure cloud storage, with encryption that would make tampering nearly impossible. Look at this, Clara whispered, pulling up footage from the previous night. The grainy video showed men loading crates into an unmarked van, their movements furtive and hurried. We're getting exactly what we need. David studied the footage, his expression grim but satisfied. License plates, faces, timestamps, all admissible in court. Harlan won't be able to talk his way out of this one. They worked through the morning, checking each camera's battery and storage capacity. Clara felt a growing sense of triumph. With each successful test, their evidence collection had grown far beyond that initial ledger. They now had hundreds of hours of video footage, detailed financial records, and photographs documenting every aspect of Harlan's illegal operation. Back at Clara's cabin, they had converted her spare room into a makeshift command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with shipping routes and known contacts. A sophisticated computer system, borrowed from Officer Chen, processed and cataloged their growing mountain of evidence. The Bobcat cubs, now nearly healed, watched them work. From their temporary enclosure on the back porch, the mother stayed close, seemingly understanding that these humans were trying to help. Clara had grown attached to them, but knew they'd soon be ready for release, hopefully into a safer forest, once Harlan's operation was shut down. We should do one final sweep of the evidence tonight, David suggested, checking their backup drives. Make sure everything's properly documented before we hand it over to the federal authorities. Tomorrow, Clara agreed, but something nagged at her. Success felt almost too close, too easy. She'd learned to trust her instincts during this ordeal, and right now they were screaming that something was wrong. As evening approached, her fears proved justified. They were reviewing footage when David's laptop suddenly went dark. Then Clara's. Then their backup system. No. David muttered, frantically trying to restart his computer. This isn't a coincidence. A heavy knock at the door made them both freeze. Clara's heart pounded as she heard Harlan's voice, smooth as honey, but dripping with malice. Evening, Clara, David. Lovely night for a tech malfunction, isn't it? Through the window, they could see more vehicles pulling up, Harlan's men surrounding the cabin. The security system they'd installed was dead, along with their phones and computers. You must have someone on the inside, David whispered. Someone who knew about our setup. Clara's mind raced. Their main evidence cache was vulnerable, but they had backups, hidden drives scattered throughout the property. If they could just keep Harlan distracted. The door burst open before they could form a plan. Harlan stepped in, flanked by two burly men. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. You've been quite busy, he said, gesturing to their command center. Impressive setup. Shame about the power surge that just fried all your equipment. Clara watched in horror as his men began systematically destroying their hardware. Screens shattered, hard drives crushed, months of careful work demolished in minutes. You're too late, David declared, trying to sound confident. We've already backed everything up. Federal authorities have copies of everything. Harlan's smile didn't waver. No, they don't, because you're secure cloud storage. Turns out it's not so secure when you have friends in the right places. He held up his phone, showing them a screen full of deleted files. Amazing what a good tech team can do with the right access codes. Clara's blood ran cold. They'd been so careful, but somehow Harlan had stayed one step ahead. She glanced toward the back porch, where the cubs were kept. Harlan followed her gaze. Ah yes, my original merchandise. Don't worry, we'll be collecting them shortly. But first, he nodded to his men, who began searching the cabin. Let's make sure we haven't missed any hidden surprises. Clara watched helplessly as they tore through her home, destroying everything in their path. Each crash felt like a physical blow. All their work, all their careful planning, being systematically erased. Then she heard a sound that made her heart stop, a distressed cry from the cubs. One of Harlan's men had found their enclosure. Without thinking, Clara bolted for the back door. She heard David shout her name, heard Harlan's amused chuckle, but she couldn't stop. The cubs were all they had left, the reason this had all started. She burst onto the back porch just as the man was reaching for the enclosure door. The mother bobcat snarled, backing into a corner with her cubs. Don't touch them. Clara positioned herself between the man and the animals. Clara, David's voice carried a warning, but it was too late. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Harlan. his expression no longer amused. "You know," he said, advancing slowly, "I've been patient. Watched you play detective. Let you think you were building a case. But now," he gestured around at the destruction, "now you've got nothing. No evidence, no backup, no proof. Just your word against mine. And in this county," he smiled coldly, "well, we both know whose word carries more weight." Clara stood her ground, though her heart hammered in her chest. Behind her, the mother bobcat growled low and steady, as if sensing the danger. The cubs huddled together, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This isn't over." "Oh, but it is." Harlan moved closer, his intention clear in every step. "The only question is whether you're going to be smart and step aside, or if we need to handle this the hard way." Clara felt the porch railing at her back, realized she was trapped between Harlan and a 15-foot drop to the rocky ground below. The mother bobcat's growls grew louder, more urgent. In that moment, Clara understood that this confrontation had always been inevitable from the night she first heard scratching at her door. She'd been on a collision course with this man who saw nature as something to be conquered and exploited. The cubs whimpered, and Clara made her choice. She wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. Harlan's face darkened as he read her determination. "Have it your way," he said, and reached for her. Time seemed to slow as Harlan advanced toward Clara on the porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath his heavy boots, each step bringing him closer to where she stood protecting the cubs. Behind her, the 15-foot drop to the ravine yawned wide, rocks and thorny bushes waiting below. "Last chance," Harlan growled, reaching into his jacket. The metallic glint of a handgun caught the fading daylight. "Move away from the animals, and maybe we can still work something out." Clara's throat went dry, but she held her position. The mother bobcat's growls intensified, a primal warning that vibrated through the air. The cubs huddled closer together. In their enclosure, their eyes wide with fear. "You won't shoot me," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Too many witnesses, too much noise." Harlan's laugh was cold and hollow. "Out here, nobody's going to hear anything. And if they do," he shrugged, "well, self-defense is a powerful legal argument, especially when the deceased was caught trespassing." He took another step forward, and Clara felt the porch railing press harder against her back. Her mind raced, calculating distances, options, possibilities. The ravine behind her was too steep for escape. The door to her left was blocked by one of Harlan's men. To her right, only the cub's enclosure and the mother bobcat, who continued her low, threatening growl. "You know what your problem is, Clara," Harlan said, raising the gun. "You never learn your place in the natural order. These aren't pets. They're resources, meant to be used, just like this land, just like everything else." Clara's hands gripped the railing behind her. "You're wrong. They're living creatures with just as much right to right." Harlan spat the word. "Rights are for people, and even then, only for people who know how to play the game." He steadied his aim. "I tried to be reasonable, tried to handle this quietly, but you just wouldn't listen." The mother bobcat's growls suddenly ceased. In the sudden silence, Clara could hear her own heart pounding. She saw Harlan's finger tighten on the trigger and closed her eyes. The attack came without warning. A flash of fur and fury launched from the shadows beside the enclosure. The mother bobcat struck with devastating precision, her claws raking across Harlan's gun hand. He screamed, the weapon clattering to the porch boards. Clara didn't hesitate. As Harlan stumbled backward, batting at the enraged animal, she lunged forward. Her shoulder connected with his chest, driving him further off balance. The mother bobcat leaped clear as Harlan staggered toward the edge of the porch. His foot caught in something, one of his own snares, pulled from the evidence pile and hastily set by Clara and David that morning. The steel cable tightened around his ankle, and his eyes widened in recognition of the trap's familiar bite. "No," he shouted, arms windmilling as he lost his balance. The snare's anchor held firm, but the sudden tension caused him to spin, toppling headfirst over the porch railing. The impact when he hit the ravine wall echoed through the trees. The snare cable went taut, leaving him suspended awkwardly partway down the slope. Cursing and thrashing, Clara, David's voice cut through the chaos. He burst onto the porch, breathing hard. "Are you okay?" "I heard," he broke off, taking in the scene. "Is that his own trap?" Clara said, her voice shaking with leftover adrenaline. "Seems fitting." David rushed to the railing, assessing the situation. Harlan dangled about 6 feet below, the snare cable wrapped painfully around his leg. Blood from the bobcat's attack dripped from his hand onto the rocks below. "Help's coming," David said, turning to Clara. "I got through to Marcus. You remember, the retired wildlife officer. He called in some favors. Federal agents are on their way." As if on cue, they heard vehicles approaching through the trees. Harlan's curses turned to desperate threats. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted up at them. "I still own half the county. My lawyers will." The mother Bobcat appeared at the railing, silencing him with a warning hiss. She had positioned herself between the porch and her cubs, her golden eyes fixed on the trapped man below. There was something almost satisfied in her pose, as if she understood the irony of his predicament. Voices called from the front of the cabin. David waved to get their attention. "Back here. We've got him contained." Clara sagged against the wall, the full weight of what had just happened hitting her. The mother Bobcat glanced her way, and for a moment their eyes met. There was intelligence in that gaze, and something else, a shared understanding, perhaps, between two beings who had fought to protect what mattered most. Federal agents swarmed onto the porch, quickly taking control of the scene. They secured Harlan, carefully extracting him from his predicament while documenting everything with cameras and notepads. One agent approached Clara, his badge identifying him as Senior Agent Thompson. "Marcus filled us in on the way here," he said. "Said you'd had uncovered quite an operation, though I understand most of your evidence was destroyed." "All of it," Clara admitted. Harlan made sure of that. David stepped forward. "Not quite all." He pulled a small device from his pocket, a backup drive, barely larger than his thumb. "I managed to grab this when they first broke in. It's not everything, but it should be enough to get started." The agent's eyebrows rose as he took the drive. "Well done." Between this and what we found in Harlan's vehicle when we arrived, let's just say, he wasn't as careful about hiding his own records as he thought. More vehicles arrived, including animal control officers who came to check on the Bobcat family. Clara watched anxiously as they examined the cubs, relief flooding through her when they confirmed both would recover fully. The mother Bobcat remained close to her cubs throughout the examination, but her posture had changed. The desperate, cornered energy from before was gone, replaced by something calmer, more assured. She had fought for her family and won. Now she could focus on helping them heal. As the scene continued to unfold around them, David put a hand on Clara's shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, watching as Harlan was led away in handcuffs, his previous confidence replaced by sullen defeat. "I think I am, though I'm still not entirely sure how we got here." "I do," David said softly. "You heard a cry for help and chose to answer it. Everything else just followed from that." Clara smiled, remembering that first night, the scratching at her door that had changed everything. "I suppose it did." The mother Bobcat's quiet chirp drew their attention. She stood at the edge of the porch, cubs safely behind her, watching Clara with those intelligent golden eyes. For a moment, all was still. Then she dipped her head just slightly in acknowledgement. A thank you, a farewell, all in one gesture. Within seconds, she had gathered her cubs and disappeared into the growing darkness, leaving only paw prints and memory behind. Agent Thompson approached them again, his notebook open. "We'll need official statements from both of you. And I should warn you, this case could take months to fully unravel. Harlan's network runs deep." "That's okay," Clara said, standing straighter. "We'll be here." She looked at David, saw the same determination in his eyes. "Whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen again." The agent nodded, understanding. Around them, the investigation continued, flashlights piercing the gathering dusk as evidence was collected and photographs taken. The night air carried the promise of rain, but Clara didn't mind. She had found her strength, rediscovered her family, and helped bring justice to both human and animal victims of cruelty. Harlan's own trap had been his undoing, but the real victory lay in the unity of those who had stood against him, human and animal alike, each playing their part in bringing truth to light. In the days following Harlan's arrest, Clara's quiet corner of the Blue Ridge foothills transformed into a hub of investigative activity. Federal agents combed through years of records, connecting dots that revealed the true scope of Harlan's illegal wildlife trafficking operation. What had begun with to trap Bobcat cubs had uncovered a network that stretched across 3 states. Clara sat on her porch, watching the sunrise paint the morning sky in soft pinks and golds. The mother Bobcat and her cubs rested in the makeshift shelter nearby, their presence a constant reminder of why this fight had been worth every moment. David emerged from the cabin, carrying the steaming mugs of coffee the agents just called. He said, handing her a mug. "They've arrested for more of Harlan's associates, local officials who were helping cover up his operation." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. "I still can't believe how deep it went." "That's the thing about corruption," David said, settling into the chair beside her. "Once it takes root, it spreads like kudzu, but it can't stand up to the light of day." They sat in comfortable silence, a far cry from the tension that had marked their early reunion. The past weeks had worn away years of misunderstanding, replacing old hurts with new trust. Working together to protect the Bobcats and expose Harlan had healed wounds neither had fully acknowledged. Agent Thompson's vehicle appeared on the dirt road, kicking up dust as it approached. He had become a regular visitor, updating them on the investigation's progress and gathering additional details. As new connections emerged, morning, he called, climbing the porch steps. Thought you'd want to hear this in person. We've frozen all of Harlan's assets. The judge approved our request to convert seized funds into conservation efforts. Some of that money will go toward establishing a protected corridor right here in these hills. Clara straightened. A wildlife corridor, 2,000 acres, connecting existing preserves, should give animals like your Bobcat family safer passage. He smiled. Speaking of which, how are they doing? Getting stronger every day, Clara said. The cubs are almost ready for release. The wildlife vet checked them yesterday and said their injuries have healed completely. David leaned forward. What about Harlan himself? Facing multiple federal charges, his lawyers are pushing for a deal, but with the evidence we've gathered, he's looking at significant time. His network is finished. The news settled over them like a warm blanket. Justice, so elusive in the beginning, had finally found its way home. Over the next week, Clara and David worked with wildlife experts to prepare the Bobcat family for release. They chose a spot deep in the newly protected land, far from any human settlements. The morning of the release dawned clear and cool, dew sparkling on spider webs strung between branches. Clara checked the carriers one last time. The cubs, now alert and energetic, paced inside, while their mother remained characteristically calm. David loaded them carefully into his truck, and they drove in contemplative silence to the release site. The location was perfect, a small clearing bordered by dense forest, with a stream nearby and plenty of natural cover. Clara and David set the carriers down, positioning them to give the family a clear path to freedom. Ready? David asked softly. Clara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Together, they opened the carriers. The cubs bounded out first, their movements confident and strong, so different from the injured, frightened creatures she'd found in Harlan's traps. They paused at the forest edge, looking back at their mother, who emerged more deliberately from her carrier. The mother Bobcat stepped into the clearing, her scarred face catching the morning light. She moved forward slowly, assessing their surroundings with the same intelligence that had led her to seek help on that stormy night. The cubs chirped softly, eager to explore, but waiting for her signal. Then, in a moment Clara would remember forever, the mother Bobcat turned and looked directly at her. Those golden eyes held Clara's gaze, communicating something beyond words, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of a shared journey. The Bobcat dipped her head in that distinctive gesture Clara had come to know, a final acknowledgement between two beings who had fought together against cruelty and won. With a flick of her tail, she gathered her cubs and moved into the forest. They disappeared into the underbrush, leaving only swaying branches to mark their passage. David stepped closer, putting an arm around his sister's shoulders. You did it, Clara. You saved them. She leaned against him, feeling the strength of their rebuilt relationship. We did it. I couldn't have faced Harlan without you. You know what? I think you could have. But I'm glad I got to be part of it. He squeezed her shoulder. You showed me how to fight for what's right again. Reminded me why I became a ranger in the first place. Clara wiped her eyes, smiling. Maybe that's what we all needed. A reminder that standing up to wrongdoing isn't hopeless. That one person can make a difference. They stayed a while longer, watching the forest where the Bobcats had vanished. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine and earth, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Clara felt different than she had that stormy night, when a desperate mother had scratched at her door. Stronger, more certain of herself and her place in the world. The quiet peace of the moment was interrupted by David's phone buzzing. He checked the message and grinned. Agent Thompson says they've just arrested the last major player in Harlan's network. It's really over. Clara took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. No, it's just beginning. There will always be more animals needing protection, more battles to fight, and you'll be ready for them, David said confidently. She nodded, knowing it was true. The timid wildlife volunteer who had hesitated to confront wrongdoing was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own strength and worth. The mother Bobcat had taught her that sometimes the greatest courage comes from protecting others, and the fiercest strength grows from gentleness. Together, they walked back to the truck, leaving the clearing to its new inhabitants. Above them, the sun climbed higher, warming the protected land that would now serve as a sanctuary for countless wild creatures. Clara carried with her the memory of those golden eyes, and the knowledge that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a simple choice to help another being in need. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.